The story kicks off with the commercial flight cruising through the sky, where our main character, Jack, is relaxing and pouring himself a drink. Everything seems completely normal as the passengers sit comfortably in their seats. Suddenly, violent turbulence hits, sending massive shock waves through the entire aircraft. The shaking is so severe that unbuckled passengers are thrown toward the ceiling as oxygen masks drop down instantly. At that exact moment, severe air pressure triggers a massive explosion on one of the wings. The blast is so devastating that the tail section rips apart midair, plunging several passengers thousands of feet to their deaths. Within seconds, the plane goes completely out of control, nosediving rapidly toward an uninhabited island. When Jack finally regains consciousness, he finds himself lying in the middle of the deep woods and rushes out in absolute panic. He quickly realizes he is stranded on a deserted island. Hearing desperate cries for help echoing from a distance, Jack wastes no time and runs straight toward the chaos. The crash site is a scene of total devastation, filled with bleeding survivors and pure agony. Being the only doctor around, Jack immediately jumps into action to save lives. But a terrifying noise suddenly catches his attention, and he spots a massive piece of the broken wing about to crush a pregnant woman trapped underneath. Realizing the imminent danger, without wasting a single second, Jack rushed toward the girl and pulled her out of harm's way just before the massive wing slammed down. A split second later, the wing crashed into the dirt, triggering a secondary explosion. Completely ignoring his own painful injuries, Jack immediately went back to work, desperately trying to save more lives. Sadly, due to the intensity of the initial blast, most of the severely wounded survivors had already passed away. A bit later, Jack wandered into the deeper parts of the jungle alone, attempting to stitch up his own deep wounds. However, the gash was located on a spot on his back that he simply couldn't reach properly. Right then, a girl approached him, and when Jack asked for assistance, she agreed to help stitch the wound. She was completely shocked to see that Jack was taking the stitches without any anesthesia, yet his face showed absolutely no sign of pain. This intense moment marked the official beginning of their acquaintance. As night fell, Jack analyzed the shattered tail section of the aircraft and realized that the cockpit might still be intact. He figured that if they could somehow retrieve the transceiver from it, they could establish contact with the rescue team. Upon hearing this, the girl, whose name was Kate, suddenly remembered something crucial. She mentioned that during the day, she had spotted smoke rising from a mountainous valley, which could likely be the crash site of the cockpit, so she immediately geared up to head into the jungle with Jack. This news sparked a new glimmer of hope in Jack's heart, but just at that moment, a chilling, terrifying roar echoed from the deep dark woods. Everyone at the campsite froze in absolute panic, staring toward the direction of the horrifying sound. They watched in horror as distant trees began snapping and collapsing one by one, making it obvious that a massive beast was charging directly toward them. Luckily, the unseen monster decided not to reveal itself, and the surroundings eventually grew quiet again. The next morning, the survivors gathered to discuss the mysterious creature from the night before. Some speculated it was a prehistoric dinosaur, while others believed it was some kind of gigantic monster. Pure dread was now visible on everyone's faces. Jack himself was secretly terrified to the core. However, he knew very well that if they wanted to make it out of this island alive, reaching that cockpit was their only shot. With that goal in mind, he took Charlie and Kate along and ventured into the perilous depths of the jungle. Shortly after they started, the sky suddenly broke open with a torrential downpour, making it even harder to locate the cockpit within the dense forest. Meanwhile, back at the crash site, the survivors taking shelter inside the plane felt the terrifying creature awakening once more. However, the three inside the woods had absolutely no clue about the danger brewing behind them. After hours of combing through the thick jungle, they finally stumbled upon the nose section of the aircraft. Stepping inside, they discovered that all the first-class passengers had already lost their lives. Jack cautiously walked toward the cockpit door, picking up a piece of metal scrap to pry open the jammed lock. But just a moment later, a lifeless body suddenly tumbled right out of the cockpit, startling them. Once the dust settled, Jack stepped inside the cockpit and began searching through the wreckage for the signal device. Right then, the pilot unexpectedly showed signs of movement. Looking closely, Jack realized that the pilot was miraculously still alive. Fortunately, he had only sustained a minor head injury. As he regained awareness, the pilot began explaining the chilling details behind the tragic crash. He revealed that as their flight was passing over this mysterious patch of ocean, all communication signals vanished into thin air. Sensing immediate danger, he desperately tried to turn the aircraft around, but an unnatural and mysterious draft of wind suddenly seized complete control of the plane. There was something else out there in the dark. Just then, the pilot remembered there was a backup transceiver system inside the plane. However, he quickly delivered the crushing news that this primary signal device was completely broken. Hearing this, their spirits sank instantly. But right at that moment, an eerie, terrifying noise echoed from outside, and the entire nose section began shaking violently. Paralyzed with fear, everyone inside froze and stared out the window. At that exact second, a massive shadow was seen passing right next to the aircraft. The moment the pilot stepped closer to the glass to see what was happening, an unknown, terrifying entity snatched him and violently dragged him out. Witnessing this horrific sight, Kate let out a blood-curdling scream. Before Jack could even process what happened to help him, the mysterious beast brutally slaughtered the pilot, leaving him covered in blood. Following such a gruesome death, the atmosphere grew incredibly tense and terrifying. But before they could even think of a plan, the plane began swaying violently again and suddenly collapsed from the trees to the ground with a massive thud. The impact threw the three of them in different directions. Wasting no time, Jack quickly grabbed the signal device and sprinted into the deeper parts of the jungle. The bone-chilling roars echoing behind them only intensified their dread. Fortunately, the mysterious creature decided not to hunt them down, allowing all three to catch their breath and head back toward the camp. However, as soon as they stepped into the campsite, they found two men locked in a brutal fistfight. Jack and Michael immediately rushed in and managed to pull them apart. Upon questioning, it was revealed that James heavily suspected Carly was somehow responsible for the entire plane crash. His logic was that although everyone else sitting in Carly's section had died, he miraculously survived without a scratch. Infuriated by this wild accusation, Carly lost his temper, and the situation almost turned violent again. That was when Kate screamed at the top of her lungs, finally forcing both men to calm down. She then broke the real news to the group. They had found the signal device, but it was currently completely dead and damaged. If they wanted to call for a rescue team to get off this island, fixing that device was their only option. Upon hearing this, everyone stared at each other blankly, as none of them had any technical skills to repair such machinery. Finally, Carly stepped forward and announced that he could fix it. Predictably, James lost his temper again and started shouting in protest. Seeing the unnecessary drama, Jack snapped, completely losing his patience, and harshly warned James to shut his mouth. Intimidated by Jack's sudden rage, James backed down and didn't utter another word. Once the chaos quieted down, a fantastic piece of news came to light. It turned out that Carly used to serve as a communications officer in the military, and since this transceiver was from a military aircraft, repairing it was right up his alley. He immediately got to work without wasting a single second and managed to bring the dead device back to life in no time. However, a major roadblock appeared. The battery was almost completely drained. Now, if they wanted to broadcast a distress signal to save their lives, they would have to take the machine to a much higher altitude. When Kate curiously asked exactly how high they needed to go, Carly pointed toward a massive, towering mountain peak in the middle of the jungle. The moment Kate saw that sky-high cliff, her heart sank, having barely escaped death moments ago and being terrified of risking her life all over again. Realizing they were completely out of options, Kate decided to head into the perilous jungle with 4 other survivors without informing Jack. Along the way, James unexpectedly caught up and joined their group. He intentionally shoved past Kate, aggressively taking the lead. Kate was deeply irritated by his obnoxious and rude behavior. Little did she know, this very man was about to step up and save all their lives. After navigating a series of rugged, winding mountain trails, they finally arrived in the heart of a dense forest. Even there, James kept relentlessly mocking Carly, blaming him for the aviation disaster. Sick of the constant insults, Carly finally snapped and turned around to confront him. Right at that exact second, a bizarre and chilling sound echoed from behind. The roar was so terrifying that everyone froze, shifting their eyes toward the rustling bushes ahead. Something dangerous was charging directly at them at a frantic speed. Panic set in instantly, and the group scattered in all directions to save themselves. Amazingly, James stood his ground like a rock, showing absolutely no signs of fear. Once the others had cleared out, he pulled a handgun from his pocket and unleashed a barrage of bullets at the oncoming threat. However, the creature was an absolute beast, absorbing the gunfire as if it were nothing. Fortunately, one of James' desperate shots managed to hit the animal's weak spot. Hearing a massive, agonizing shriek, the rest of the group rushed back to the scene, but when they got a clear look at the creature, they were completely jaw-dropped. This was no mythical monster or alien. It was a massive, ferocious polar bear. The ultimate shock for everyone was trying to understand how on earth a polar bear could exist on a scorching tropical island covered in dense jungle. For a second, they genuinely wondered if the trauma of the crash was causing them to hallucinate. But the real twist was yet to come, as a burning question gripped everyone's minds. How did James manage to board a commercial flight with a loaded handgun? When the group confronted him, he quickly defended himself, claiming he had salvaged the weapon from the corpse of a dead police officer. To back up his story, he pulled a law enforcement badge from his pocket and showed it to them. This eased their suspicions a bit, and they resumed their trek up toward the mountain peak. Right on cue, the signal bars on the transceiver suddenly maxed out. Without losing a moment, Carly immediately tried to broadcast a distress call. However, he quickly realized that someone else was already transmitting on the emergency rescue frequency. This meant they weren't alone. Another person on this island was continuously sending out a plea for help. It baffled everyone how anyone else could possibly survive in such a desolate place. As they stood there lost in thought, a woman's voice suddenly cracked through the static of the device. Listening intently, they recognized it as a Frenchwoman's voice, which instantly made them believe a rescue party was close by. Overjoyed by this sudden hope, their excitement knew no bounds. They quickly urged the survivor, fluent in French, to communicate with the presumed rescue team. Within seconds, however, the cheerful expressions vanished from their faces. It wasn't a live rescue team at all, but rather an agonizing distress loop recorded a very long time ago. Suddenly, the signal cut out entirely. Carly quickly analyzed the transmission frequency and uncovered a spine-chilling truth. According to his technical calculations, this distress signal had been broadcasting on a loop for the past 16 years. Yet in over a decade, no one had ever responded to it. The grim reality hit them hard. The outside world had absolutely no idea anyone was trapped on this island. This devastating realization shook everyone to their core. A flood of unanswered questions raced through their minds. What was that terrifying entity lurking in the dark woods? How did a polar bear end up in a tropical jungle? And what actually caused their plane to tear apart mid-air? These supernatural and bizarre events were breaking their spirits from the inside out. They were now convinced that a dark, massive conspiracy was hidden in the heart of this island. Michael's pet dog suddenly started barking frantically at the dark woods. Hearing the aggressive barks, the rest of the survivors gathered around the area in absolute fear. Jack cautiously pointed his flashlight into the pitch-black wilderness, trying to spot what was hiding out there. However, due to the heavy darkness and a series of strange noises, he couldn't see anything clearly. Losing his patience, James didn't hesitate for a second and switched on a large, high-powered searchlight, revealing a shocking sight that left everyone completely jaw-dropped. A pack of massive wild boars was lurking right in the shadows. The moment the survivors spotted them, panic broke out and everyone began running in all directions to save their lives. Miraculously, instead of launching an attack, the wild boars sprinted away at a frantic speed, disappearing into the deep forest. Once the animals cleared out, everyone took a deep breath of relief. However, the peace was short-lived because the next morning, they discovered that all the salvaged food supplies from the aircraft had completely run out. Hearing this crushing news, James absolutely lost his temper, aggressively accusing the heavy-set man of eating way more than his fair share. Within seconds, a brutal fistfight broke out between the two of them. Sensing immediate danger, Jack quickly stepped in between them and managed to calm both sides down. But deep down, Jack knew very well that simply breaking up fights wasn't going to solve their actual problem. He realized that if they didn't secure a new source of food very quickly, these starving survivors would turn on each other in no time. Right at that moment, a sharp hunting knife flew through the air, landing right next to James. Startled by this, everyone quickly turned around to see where it came from. The bald man then stepped forward, suggesting that they could hunt those wild boars to satisfy their hunger. James, however, hated the idea, believing it was absolutely impossible to hunt such massive beasts with just a tiny knife. Without arguing, the bald man quietly opened his briefcase, revealing a massive collection of razor-sharp hunting knives. Seeing the arsenal, James was completely stunned. Without wasting a single second, the three of them set off into the jungle, tracking the animals' footprints. After combing through the dense forest for quite some time, the bald man suddenly sensed something off. He immediately raised his hand, signaling the other two to freeze in their tracks. Walking over to a large tree, he noticed fresh boar scratch marks, confirming that their prey was close by. Moments later, they stealthily approached the spot, and the bald man used hand gestures to map out the plan. He signaled Kate to stay with him for a frontal attack, while gesturing for Michael to flank from the side. However, the moment Michael saw him pointing fingers, he unexpectedly snapped and shouted in anger. Hearing the sudden outburst, the wild boar instantly went on high alert and charged directly at them at a frantic speed. The bald man managed to dive out of the way, but poor Michael took a direct hit and was thrown to the ground. Fortunately, the boar didn't attack a second time, allowing Michael to escape with only minor bruises. Even the bald man was deeply shaken by the close call. After catching no breath, Kate suggested they all head back to the campsite, but the bald man refused to let this opportunity slip away. Telling the other two to turn back, he ventured deeper into the woods alone to pursue the boar. Left with no other choice, Kate and Michael started heading back toward the camp. But halfway through the trek, Kate suddenly stopped in her tracks and, without saying a word, began unbuckling her belt. Seeing a girl do this out of nowhere in the middle of the woods left Michael completely bewildered, unable to figure out what she was up to. But a second later, Kate agilely climbed up a nearby tree, revealing that she actually wanted to get to a higher altitude to check the radio signal. Poor Michael was left standing below, staring at her blankly. However, right as Kate was securing the transceiver to an upper branch, a bone-chilling, terrifying roar suddenly echoed from the deep jungle. The roar was so incredibly terrifying that it completely panicked her, causing her to drop the equipment from her hands. Right at that moment, looking down from the upper branches, her eyes fell directly upon the dangerous beast roaming around that exact area. Meanwhile, completely oblivious to the danger, the bald man was still searching for prey deeper in the woods. Just then, the squeal of a wild boar echoed from the bushes ahead. Without wasting a second, the bald man sprinted toward the sound. However, a moment later, the boar's squeal suddenly turned into an agonizing shriek of death. Immediately after, the surrounding trees began shaking violently, and the blood-curdling roar of a terrifying entity echoed through the dense forest. Witnessing this, the bald man froze completely. He was so paralyzed with fear that he even forgot to run away. Right at that exact second, the massive monster appeared directly in front of his eyes. On the flip side, Kate and Michael had successfully made it back to the campsite. Kate immediately rushed to Jack and explained everything that had transpired in the woods. She even mentioned that the bald man had likely already been devoured by that mysterious creature. Hearing this, Jack's face went completely pale. But right then, his attention was suddenly caught by a rustling bush nearby. He feared that the dangerous monster might have tracked them all the way back to the camp. To uncover the truth, he didn't hesitate a second and dashed straight into the jungle. However, the moment he reached the deep woods, the bald man unexpectedly stepped out from behind the trees, completely unharmed. He was carrying a dead wild boar, and fresh blood was smeared all over him, making it obvious that he had just survived a brutal encounter. As night fell, the survivors gathered around to pray for the peace of the souls lost in the crash. During this time, Michael pulled the bald man aside and asked if he had genuinely seen the monster in the woods with his own eyes. The bald man remained quiet for a few seconds before bluntly stating that he hadn't seen anything out there, but Michael found that completely impossible to believe. Now that their food supply was secured, a brand new crisis arose right before them as the fresh water stored in the airplane was running out at a rapid pace. While they could satisfy their hunger by hunting, surviving for long by drinking the salty ocean water was completely impossible, making it absolutely crucial to alert the rescue teams of their survival at any cost. For this very reason, without informing a soul, Carly headed back toward the mountains once again in a desperate search for a radio signal. However, the exact moment the device began picking up a signal, someone blindsided her from behind, striking her head and knocking her completely unconscious. Surprisingly, the attacker didn't take her life, but simply shattered the signal device into pieces before vanishing into thin air. Based on all the evidence gathered so far, Carly became thoroughly convinced that someone was hiding on this island who desperately wanted to prevent the survivors from ever escaping, though the identity of this person remained a massive mystery. Determined to uncover the truth, Carly set out alone the very next day to search every inch of the island. After walking for quite some time, she sat down by the shore to catch her breath, and that was when a thick steel cable buried under the sand suddenly caught her eye. She immediately tried to pull it out, only to realize in utter bewilderment that one end of the cable plunged straight into the deep ocean. She then noticed that the other end stretched deep into the woods, sparking a new glint of hope for survival within her, and she immediately began tracking the cable into the dense jungle. Shortly after, however, her path was abruptly blocked. Looking down carefully, she noticed thin iron tripwires spread across the ground, a dangerous trap that even an ordinary person could easily recognize. She began stepping with extreme caution, but on her very second step, a sudden click echoed, activating the trap. Out of nowhere, a razor-sharp wooden branch swung down, piercing clean through the flesh and skin of her leg. Writhed in agonizing pain, Carly hung in midair, letting out a blood-curdling scream. She struggled intensely against the brutal pain for a while before finally composing herself, gathering every ounce of her strength and pulling the sharp branch out of her leg. However, the sheer intensity of the torture and the excessive blood loss caused her to black out immediately. Night fell in the blink of an eye, and after some time, Carly slowly opened her eyes. But before she could even cry out for help, a mysterious individual suddenly appeared out of nowhere and cut the trap's rope. In the next split second, Carly crashed face first onto the ground, leaving her head spinning violently. She could only catch a blurry glimpse of the figure approaching her before she lost consciousness once again. The next morning, when she finally came to, the sky was completely masked by dark, ominous clouds, signaling to her instantly that something terrible was brewing back at the camp. Ignoring her bloody and mangled leg entirely, she began sprinting toward the camp at a frantic speed. But before she could even make it back, a bone-chilling horror had already unfolded there. The pregnant girl at the camp suddenly jolted awake from her sleep, but the moment she looked down at her stomach, she froze in absolute terror. Her unborn baby was completely gone. Right at that moment, the distant sound of a crying baby echoed in her ears. Following the cries, she stumbled upon the bald man, whose eye had turned completely pitch black as he muttered eerie prophecies about the future. Even after witnessing that terrifying manifestation, the girl didn't back down right there. Instead, she continued moving straight ahead. Within moments, she reached a baby stroller where the continuous sound of a baby crying was echoing from beneath a white cloth. Summoning all her courage to uncover the truth, she pulled the cloth away, but instead of a baby, there were only pieces of raw meat lying inside. The moment she witnessed this bone-chilling sight, she let out a blood-curdling scream. Hearing her frantic cry, Charlie didn't waste a single second and rushed to the scene immediately. However, by that time, Anna had completely lost her mental balance and began blindly attacking the people around her. Nevertheless, Charlie somehow managed to reason with her and calmed her down. At first, it seemed to everyone that Anna had merely had a horrific nightmare in her sleep. But when they looked at her hand, they noticed fresh blood smeared all over it, spreading a strange panic through everyone's hearts. In the morning, when Jack thoroughly examined Anna's hand, the real mystery was uncovered. Out of sheer terror, she had clenched her fist so hard that her own fingernails had dug deep into her palm. This was the exact reason why her hand was bleeding like that. Upon learning this, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. However, that very night, while Anna was asleep, an invisible assault suddenly struck her. It felt to her as though someone was repeatedly stabbing her stomach with a sharp knife. Hearing her sky-rending screams, the others rushed to the spot, but absolutely no one was to be found there. Trembling in sheer terror, Anna claimed that someone had just driven a knife into her stomach, but when Jack pulled aside the clothing on her belly, there wasn't even a single scratch mark. Jack figured that because of the pregnancy, these wild and delusional thoughts were simply spinning in Anna's head. For this reason, he didn't take the matter seriously at all and gave her some medication, telling her to rest quietly. But the moment Anna heard this dismissive attitude from Jack, she flew into a blind rage. It felt to her that Jack wasn't believing a single word of hers. Consumed by this resentment, she didn't stay there for another second, packed her bags, left the camp, and headed deep into the dense jungle. Charlie couldn't stand this injustice, so he immediately set off into the woods after Anna to reason with her and bring her back. Shortly after, however, Anna suddenly went into severe labor pains right in the middle of the forest. Seeing her in this critical state, Charlie panicked completely and immediately bolted toward the camp to fetch Jack. But halfway through, he crossed paths with Jim. Without wasting another moment, Charlie sent Jim rushing to Jack to report Anna's alarming condition. Yet poor Charlie had absolutely no clue that this single wrong decision of his was about to bring an unimaginable danger upon everyone very soon. Over there, Anna's labor pains gradually began to subside, and the two of them started making their way back toward the camp. But right at that moment, Jim abruptly appeared halfway through and stood directly in front of them. The strangest part was that he hadn't brought Jack along with him. Instead, he just stared at Anna continuously with a mysterious and sinister gaze. At that exact time, Carly somehow managed to limp her way back into the camp. She flat out told Jack that someone else besides them was hiding on this island. While Jack was racking his brain to make sense of this mystery, the heavy-set man came running to the scene in a frantic rush. Trembling in absolute panic, he revealed that another man had survived the plane crash alive, someone who had been hiding right under everyone's noses all this time, and his name was Jim. The moment he heard this, the color completely drained from Jack's face. He instantly realized that a massive and terrifying danger was about to unfold. Losing no more time, he dashed into the woods alongside the bald man to search for Anna and Charlie. However, it was already far too late, as only signs of a violent struggle were left behind, while neither Anna nor Charlie was anywhere to be seen. It was then that the bald man suggested to Jack that they should head back to camp first to gather the necessary supplies, but Jack was already spiraling into a deep panic. He felt that if he hadn't doubted Anna's words earlier and simply trusted her, the girl wouldn't be in such grave danger today. Consumed by this intense regret, Jack ignored everyone, bolted deep into the forest alone, and began searching for them like a madman. But after running a short distance, he realized that he was repeatedly looping back to the exact same spot, as if he had gotten trapped inside a twisted maze. After a while, the bald man caught up to Jack along with the rest of the group, and together they restarted the search with a new plan. Fortunately, along the way, they discovered a torn piece of Charlie's clothing, which clearly indicated they were tracking the right path. But right then, two separate paths diverging in opposite directions materialized in front of them, and surprisingly, there were human footprints leading down both ways. Consequently, the four of them decided to split up and search the separate paths. The bald man headed down one trail, while Jack pressed forward along the other path with Kate by his side. But their luck was so incredibly rotten that misfortune just wouldn't leave them alone. Within moments, the sky broke open into a torrential downpour, making the task of finding Charlie 10 times harder than before. After scouring the woods for quite some time, Jack's hands suddenly brushed against another torn piece of Charlie's clothing, making him feel that he was now closing in fast on the target. But right at that moment, Anna's agonizing scream and frantic crying echoed from a distance out of nowhere. Guided by that sound, Jack started scaling a steep cliff without a second thought, with Kate climbing right behind him. However, in his desperate haste, Jack suddenly lost his grip and went rolling straight down the cliff, crashing hard onto the ground below. As he struggled in extreme pain to turn his body and stand up, he looked up only to see Jim standing right before his eyes. Without uttering a single word, Jim delivered a powerful, heavy kick straight into Jack's chest. If you want to see the next part of this thrilling story as quickly as possible, then drop a comment right now with part 4 in the comment section below. And yes, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your friends. For those who are completely new to the channel, make sure to subscribe right now and turn on the bell icon so you never miss these mind-bending movie explanations. We will see you very soon in the next blockbuster episode. Until then, take care, stay safe, and stay healthy.